Ever get that feeling, like you're just drowning in
Oh,
information?
constantly.
Yeah, we get bombarded with claims, ideas, opinions, and you just wonder, what can I actually know for sure?
Hmm.
And that questioning, that little bit of doubt about what we know, it's actually been a massive driver behind, well, centuries of philosophy, philosophical skepticism.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
And today, yeah, we're diving deep into that really human curiosity, right? The foundation of our beliefs and how these doubts have pushed philosophers to shape our understanding of the world.
Right. So we've got these excerpts from Skeptical Philosophy for Everyone. That's our source material.
Yep.
And the mission today, unpack why philosophers even philosophize, what gets them started. And skepticism, spoiler alert, is a huge part of that story.
A major part.
We're going to look at different takes on knowledge, what it is, how we get it, where it hits a wall, and we'll try to keep it engaging, not too bogged down in jargon.
Sounds good. So where do we start? Why philosophize?
Okay, so what gets the ball rolling?
Well, the book argues, pretty convincingly, I think, that skepticism is often right there at the core, questioning if our knowledge claims hold up.
And if the ways we measure knowledge are even reliable.
Exactly. But it's not just like abstract head games.
No, it's definitely not just philosophers staring at walls, is it? The book makes a great point that real world, serious problems can kickstart this kind of deep thinking.
Like what? Give us an example.
Think about something like the threat of nuclear weapons. Still very real.
Terrifyingly real. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even after the Cold War.
Right. It just highlights how we struggle to really grasp and solve these massive global issues. They're not just, textbook exercises.
Absolutely not. And then you look at just the sheer variety of ideas out there,
Yeah.
different traditions, viewpoints, all seemingly clashing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So the urge to find some kind of order, some coherence, that philosophical drive, it feels almost necessary, doesn't it?
It really does. Bringing clarity to complexity. I know that's something you, our listener, are interested in.
For-
And to make it less abstract, the book brings up euthanasia.
Ah, yeah. That's a powerful example.
It lays out these different scenarios, right? A doctor actively ending a life,
Hmm.
removing life support.
Or even just giving pain meds that might speed things up.
Yeah, distinct situations, but all under that umbrella.
And the book does a good job highlighting the intense emotional and ethical knots there. They mentioned this scenario, a husband and wife agreed on euthanasia if things got really bad.
Okay.
But then when it happens, the husband actually says he wants to live. What does the wife do? Honor the agreement. Respect his current wish.
Wow. That's incredibly difficult. You have to question his state of mind, the nature of their promise.
Exactly. And the book stresses, look, the core questions here aren't just legal or medical. They're philosophical.
Mm.
Like, when is it okay to end an innocent life? What kind of society allows this? You can't just look up the answer in a science book. You really can't. And that shows you the conceptual side of philosophy, right?
Right.
The euthanasia debate turns on these fundamental premises, not just straightforward facts.
Like, how much pain is enough to justify ending a life?
Precisely. That's a conceptual question.
Yeah.
Needs reasoning, not just observation.
The book also mentions abortion briefly, that whole puzzle of when tissue becomes, well, a person.
Yeah, another one of those fundamental questions with huge implications. There's no simple biological switch.
No.
And philosophical arguments try to offer, reasoned views backed by principles, theories about personhood, rights, autonomy. It's not just random opinions being thrown around.
Right. So if we try to boil it down, what makes a problem philosophical? What are the key traits different from, say, a science problem?
Okay, the book lists 6 things. Philosophical problems.
Yeah.
A, tackle basic questions of truth or rightness.
Mm-hmm.
B, offer reasons, logical support.
Okay.
C, they try to support a conclusion, right, not just state one.
Got it.
D, they often pop up because the world's complex, we don't fully get it, so we need more clarity.
Makes sense.
They dig deeper, looking for fundamental explanations.
Right, beyond the surface.
And they often lead to developing whole theories. Euthanasia, abortion, they tick a lot of those boxes.
Okay, so philosophy is driven by these big questions, truth, rightness, reality, often sparked by real life and clashing views. But the book also mentions different levels of skepticism. What's that about?
Well, the very idea that philosophy can just give us a neat, clear picture of the world, skepticism challenges that too.
Ah, so it's like skepticism about the whole philosophical project itself.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah?
And it's important to get this.
Yeah.
It's not just casual, everyday doubt. Philosophical skepticism, the kind that really gets under the skin, comes from serious reflection, thinking hard about ordinary experience.
How so? Like, what kind of doubts come from just thinking about normal stuff?
Well, consider other people. We
Oh.
assume they exist, have thoughts, feelings, right?
Sure.
But really think about it. All you directly experience is your own stuff, sensations, thoughts. How can you be absolutely rock solid certain about anyone else's inner life?
Okay, I see what you mean.
Or the world outside you? Trees, buildings. Our only access is through our senses. Could it all be, some complex illusion?
Like the Matrix.
Sort of, yeah. These deeper types of skepticism question the very ground we stand on, our basic common sense view of everything.
Definitely makes your head spin if you dwell on it. Now, the book makes a pretty bold claim about someone called Sextus Empiricus. Not exactly a household name.
No, definitely not. He was a Greek physician, 2nd century AD. But this commentator suggests he might be the third most influential philosopher in the West.
Wow. Third, after Plato and Aristotle.
That's the claim. Pretty stunning, right? For someone most folks haven't heard of.
So what was so important about his work?
He basically compiled and presented all these skeptical arguments against the dogmatic philosophies of his time, and crucially, his works were rediscovered and published in the 16th, 17th centuries.
Ah, the timing was key.
Hugely key. It directly influenced guys like Montaigne, Descartes, Bayle,
Yeah.
big names. It essentially kick-started modern philosophy's obsession with refuting skepticism.
So this ancient skeptic basically set the agenda for centuries of philosophy trying to prove him wrong. That's
It
fascinating.
really is a historical twist.
Okay, so skepticism sparks philosophy. It can run really deep, but then the book asks this gut punch question. Does anyone ever know anything? That sounds extreme.
It is extreme. That lands us squarely in epistemology,
Which is?
the branch of philosophy all about knowledge itself, its nature, where it comes from, its limits. The fact we even have a field called epistemology suggests, most philosophers think knowledge is possible.
Right, that's the normal view. We all think we know stuff. Like, I know Sandy Koufax pitched for the Dodgers. That's a fact.
Exactly. That's common sense. But radical skepticism throws that right out. It claims nobody knows anything. Full stop.
That just sounds wrong. I mean, the Koufax thing, how can they say that?
It sounds absurd, I agree. But the book points out, look, this radical view, despite sounding crazy, has been around for ages in philosophy. It keeps coming back.
So there must be some kind of argument behind it. What do they point to?
Often they start with the senses. Are they reliable? Think about the lukewarm water trick.
Oh, yeah, hot hand, cold hand.
Right, put both in lukewarm water. One hand feels it is hot, the other is cold. Same water, opposite feelings. So if touch gives contradictory info about the same thing, how can we fully trust it? And why trust sight more than touch or any sense over another?
Good point. Senses can fool you. And Descartes' dream hypothesis is mentioned too. Quick version.
Descartes basically said, look, couldn't all your waking experiences, seeing, hearing, feeling, just be part of a really vivid dream?
Okay.
And here's the problem. How could you tell for sure? If you can't be 100% sure you're not dreaming right now, how can you be sure about the external world your senses seem to show you?
Yeah, that's unsettling. So if senses are shaky, maybe reason can save us? The book mentions that.
Yes, the idea that reason can correct sensory errors, like train tracks look like they meet way off in the distance.
But reason tells us they stay parallel.
Exactly. Or a stick in water looks bent.
But it's not. It's just light refraction, reason again.
Right. But the book says it's not that easy to just dismiss skepticism, even with reason.
Why not?
Well, for one, you need a reason to trust reason itself, right? And those examples show our senses do mislead us sometimes. So if skepticism is wrong, you need a really solid argument, a strong theory, to justify why our senses are generally trustworthy. And that's a big philosophical job.
Okay, so the radical skeptic really challenges our sensory knowledge. Now, when philosophers talk about knowledge, what are the usual requirements, the criteria?
The book focuses on two big ones, widely accepted. First, truth. You can't know something that's false.
Makes sense. If the earth isn't flat, you can't know it's flat.
Precisely. Belief, yes. Knowledge, no. The second is certainty. Yeah, the idea is, if you could be mistaken about something, you don't truly know it. If there's even a tiny chance you're wrong, it's not knowledge.
Wow. Truth and absolute certainty. That's a really high bar.
It's incredibly high. And the book points out this is where science often parts ways with that traditional philosophical definition. Science deals a lot with probability, best explanations, strong evidence.
Not necessarily absolute, ironclad certainty.
Right. Things can be revised.
That's interesting. So science operates differently. And the book also says science sometimes backs up the skeptic's doubts about our senses. How?
Well, think about the Earth again. Our senses say flat, right? Feels flat.
Pretty much, yeah.
Science says sphere. So science shows our basic perception can be fundamentally wrong about reality. Or water, we see clear liquid. Science says H0, molecules doing complex things. Totally different picture from our senses.
So there's this weird tension. Skepticism doubts our senses. Science sometimes proves those doubts, right? Yet the book says most big-name philosophers, the dogmatists, ultimately reject radical skepticism.
Yeah.
Why? Why push back?
That's kind of the multi-million-dollar question in philosophy. Despite these powerful skeptical arguments, even with some backup from science, most major thinkers believed knowledge is possible. They tried to find ways around the doubts to build a solid foundation.
Okay, let's look at some of those dogmatists. The book brings up Plato first, a rationalist approach, it says. What was his take on knowledge and certainty?
Plato was definitely convinced knowledge and certainty were possible. But crucially, he thought you had to go beyond the senses to get there. Reason was the key.
Not seeing or touching, but thinking.
Exactly. Genuine knowledge was intellectual, not sensory, for Plato.
And the book mentions the background, Athens losing to Sparta, the sophists causing trouble with their relativism. How did that context shape Plato's thinking?
Well, in that climate of political turmoil and philosophical uncertainty, Plato saw skepticism as dangerous. He felt the sophists, democracy maybe, were undermining the possibility of objective truth, which he thought society needed to be stable and just.
So he saw finding real knowledge as crucial for society.
Very much so. He was building on his teacher Socrates' method, rigorous questioning, to find true definitions. Plato took that and ran with it.
So how did Plato think we actually attain this true knowledge? What was his system?
Three main parts to his theory of knowledge, really. One, knowledge and certainty exist. Two, reason, not senses, is the path. Three, his famous theory of forms.
Ah, the forms. Always sounds a bit out there. Can you make it more down to earth?
Okay, think about beautiful things. A flower, a song, a person. Plato asked what makes them all beautiful.
Okay.
He said it's because they all participate somehow in the perfect, unchanging form of beauty. This perfect form exists in a higher realm, a world of forms, reachable only by reason.
So not in our everyday world.
No, our sensory world is always changing, imperfect. Remember Heraclitus, can't step in the same river twice. That's the sensory world.
Constant flux.
Right. True knowledge, for Plato, comes from grasping these eternal, perfect forms like justice, goodness, beauty, truth, using our intellect. The forms are like the ultimate blueprints.
And his allegory of the cave fits in here. How does that illustrate it?
It's a metaphor for this journey. People chained in a cave only see shadows on the wall, think that's reality.
Right.
One escapes, goes outside, sees the real world, the sun, the source of the shadows. It's painful at first, but it's the truth. That's like the philosopher moving from sensory illusion, shadows, to knowledge of the forms, real world sun, through reason.
And it had implications for how society should be run.
Big time. Those who've seen the sun, grasp the form of the good, have a duty to go back and help others, and are the only ones fit to rule justly because they actually know what goodness is.
Okay, so Plato. Optimistic about reason, knowledge is possible via the forms. But then the book switches gears to Pyrrhonism. Not a theory, but an attitude. What's that?
Yeah, Pyrrhonism is different. Named after Pyrrho. It's generally seen not as a set of claims about reality, but as a practice, suspending judgment on anything that isn't totally obvious.
So not even saying we can't know, just pausing, holding back.
Exactly. The book quotes someone, Benson Mates, saying the key thing is, it's not a doctrine. It's a way of dealing with all the dogmatic claims out there, people saying, I've found the truth.
And how's it different from academics' skepticism?
The Pyrrhonists were even more radical. In a way, they wouldn't even commit to all is doubtful, which the academics sometimes did. The goal was to pit every argument against an equally strong counterargument.
Leading to suspension of belief? Why? What was the point?
Tranquility, ataraxia, mental peace. By not getting invested in any particular belief about non-obvious things, they hope to avoid the stress and conflict that comes from arguing about what's true when we can't be sure.
Just let go of the need to know for sure.
Pretty much, except the uncertainty.
Fascinatingly different approach. Okay, fast forward again. After the ancients, the book hits the British empiricists. Locke, Berkeley, Hume. How did they approach things?
These three, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, basically flipped Plato and the rationalists on their head. Rationalists, reason first, empiricists, experience first.
Everything comes from the senses.
That was their starting point. What we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, that's the raw material for all knowledge.
And Locke's tabula rasa, the blank slate idea.
Yeah, Locke argued we're born with no innate ideas, the mind is empty, and experience writes on it. His ideas also fit with the political shifts happening, advocating individual rights, and supported the new scientific method focusing on observation.
Right. And he talked about primary and secondary qualities. What was that distinction?
Locke said primary qualities like an object's size, shape, motion exist in the object itself. Our ideas of them resemble the qualities.
Okay. Like a ball really is round.
Right. But secondary qualities, color, taste, sound, smell, aren't in the object. They're powers the object has to produce sensations in us through its primary qualities interacting with our senses.
So the ball's redness isn't in the ball itself, but a sensation it causes in me.
That was Locke's idea.
Okay. Now, Berkeley took empiricism further. An idealist, the book says. What did that mean?
Berkeley looked at Locke and saw a problem. If all we experience are our ideas, how can Locke talk about this underlying material substance that has primary qualities but which we can never directly experience?
You can't experience it. How do you know it's there?
Exactly. Berkeley's point. If matter is unknowable, maybe knowledge based on it is impossible.
So what was Berkeley's solution?
Radical. He said, esse is percipi, is to be perceived.
Meaning?
Things only exist when they're being perceived by a mind. Tables, chairs, elephants. They're just collections of ideas.
Whoa. So I leave the room, the chair isn't there because no one's perceiving it. That sounds weird.
It does sound weird.
Yeah.
But Berkeley argued, look, all we ever encounter are perceptions, colors, textures, sounds. Talking about something existing independent of perception is talking about something literally inconceivable, unknowable.
So the chair is just the collection of perceptions.
For Berkeley, yes. He rejected mind-independent matter. Now, to avoid things popping in and out of existence, he brought in God.
God is always perceiving everything.
That was his solution to keep the world stable. God's mind perceives it all, constantly.
Still pretty mind-bending. Okay, then Hume. Radical empiricism. What did he do?
Hume took empiricism to its logical and arguably skeptical conclusion. He agreed experience is all we have, but was way more critical about what we can actually know from it.
Like what?
Well, for starters, the self. Hume argued we never actually experience a unified, enduring self. All we encounter is a stream of disconnected perceptions, feelings, sensations, thoughts.
No core me, just impressions flashing by.
Yeah, he compared the mind to a theater where these perceptions just appear and disappear. There's no underlying stage owner, as it were.
Wow. Okay, what else did Hume challenge?
He made this really important distinction. Relations of ideas versus matters of fact.
Okay.
Relations of ideas are things true by definition, like bachelors are unmarried, or 2 + 2 = 4. You know them just by thinking. They're certain, but don't tell you much about the world.
Right, they're about concepts.
Matters of fact are about the world. The sun is shining. This ball will fall if I drop it. These come from experience.
And the catch.
The catch is, Hume argued, we can never know matters of fact with absolute certainty.
Never. Not even that the sun will rise tomorrow.
Nope. That leads to his famous problem of induction. We assume the future will be like the past, right? Sun always rose, so it will tomorrow. Drop balls always fell, so this one will too.
Yeah, seems reasonable.
But Hume asked, what's the logical reason for that assumption? Why must the future resemble the past? Experience tells us what has happened, not what must happen.
So our belief is just habit.
Habit and custom, Hume said, not rational justification, which is a huge problem for science, for everyday life, for everything based on predicting the future from the past.
So Hume really shook things up, questioning the self, causality, induction. How did people respond to that level of skepticism?
Big responses. The book mentions Thomas Reid first, common sense philosophy.
What was his approach?
Reid basically said, come on, Hume's skepticism leads to absurdities. He argued we have direct, reliable access to the world through our senses, and trying to prove it is misguided. We should trust our fundamental common sense beliefs.
So more like, let's be reasonable. We obviously know things about the world.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Stop tying ourselves in philosophical knots that deny the obvious.
Okay. And the other big reaction?
Immanuel Kant. Hugely influential. Kant took Hume very seriously. He said Hume awoke him from his dogmatic slumber.
Meaning Hume made him realize the problems were real.
Exactly. Kant saw the threat Hume posed to knowledge, especially scientific and mathematical knowledge. So he tried to find a middle way between rationalism and empiricism.
Okay, how? He agreed experience was key, but
He argued the mind isn't just a passive receiver, like Locke's blank slate. The mind actively structures the sensory information it receives.
structures it.
Kant said the mind imposes certain concepts or categories like causality, substance, and forms of intuition, space, and time onto the raw data from our senses. These are like built-in organizing principles. We don't learn them from experience. They're the preconditions for having experience as we know it.
So the mind shapes reality as we experience it.
Precisely. It contributes the framework.
And he worked with those analytic, synthetic, and a priori, a posteriori distinctions too.
Yes, analytic. True by definition, all bodies are extended.
Yeah.
Synthetic adds information, this body's heavy.
Mm-hmm.
A priori, known independent of experience. A posteriori, known through experience.
Right, and Kant's breakthrough was synthetic a priori knowledge. How does that work again? Sounds contradictory.
It sounds it, but Kant argued it was crucial. These are truths that are informative about the world, synthetic, but known necessarily and universally prior to experience a priori.
Like what?
Mathematical truths, 7 plus 5, 12, 12, isn't contained just in 7 plus 5. Basic principles of physics, like every event having a cause. Kant argued these aren't just definitions, nor are they just generalizations from experience. They are necessary structures of how our minds must cognize the world.
Because our minds impose that structure.
That was his Copernican revolution. Instead of the mind conforming to objects, objects as we experience them must conform to the mind's structure.
Wow, that's a fundamental shift. Okay, moving into the 20th century, how did skepticism keep evolving? Russell, Moore, Wittgenstein, Derrida are mentioned.
Yeah, the debates continued, just took new forms. Bertrand Russell, for instance, was influenced by empiricism but wanted a more rigorous, logical approach, scientific philosophy. He still wrestled deeply with that problem of the external world. Do our sense data actually match reality?
And G.E. Moore. He was Mr. Common Sense, right? Pushing back hard.
Exactly. More famously, just held up his hand and said, "Here is one hand," arguing he knew this with more certainty than any skeptical argument against it. He championed common sense beliefs. We have bodies. The earth existed before us is more certain than fancy philosophical theories denying them. He thought radical skepticism was self-defeating.
What about Wittgenstein? The book says he shifted his views.
Big shift. His later work focused less on logic mirroring reality and more on language as a tool used in social contexts, language games, within forms of life.
How does that relate to skepticism?
Wittgenstein argued that doubt only makes sense within a game against a background of things we don't doubt. You can doubt if the kettle's boiled, but not doubt the existence of kettles or boiling itself in that context. Radical, all-encompassing doubt, he thought, was like trying to play chess without a board. It becomes meaningless.
Interesting. So doubt needs context. And Derrida, deconstruction, how does he fit?
Derrida comes more from the continental tradition. His work is complex, but deconstruction involves analyzing texts to show how meaning is unstable, dependent on differences within language, and often subverts itself.
Unstable meaning. Sounds skeptical.
It is, in a way. His famous line, "There's nothing outside the text," suggests meaning isn't anchored to some external reality, but is always caught within the web of language. It's a kind of skepticism about achieving fixed, certain meaning or direct access to reality through language.
And the book notes criticism's lack of clarity may be leading to relativism.
Yeah, those are common criticisms. That the focus on instability can make it seem like anything goes, interpretation-wise. And others argue, no, language does connect to a real world outside the text.
So it seems skepticism in all these different guises just keeps going, influencing everything. Religion, ethics, politics, too.
Absolutely. Philosophy of religion constantly grapples with skeptical challenges to arguments for God, or the nature of religious knowledge, the problem of evil. Ethics faces moral skepticism. Are there objective moral truths, or is it all relative? How can we know what's right?
And politics.
Well, think about democratic systems with checks and balances. There's a kind of built-in skepticism about any one person or group having infallible truth or absolute power. Debates about free speech versus classified information also touch on this tension. What should be known? What are the limits?
It really permeates everything. And the book brings up this final challenge, the problem of the criterion. Sounds fundamental.
It is. It's a killer skeptical argument. Basically asks, how do you know your criteria for telling good beliefs from bad beliefs are actually good criteria? To know they're good criteria, you'd need, well, criteria for judging criteria. Or you need to already know some true beliefs to test your criteria against. But how do you know those beliefs are true without criteria?
It sounds completely circular.
It's deeply circular. How do you start justifying knowledge without assuming you already know something or have a reliable way to know? It's a bedrock skeptical puzzle.
So, faced with all this, how have philosophers generally responded? Trust common sense? Just get on with science.
A mix of strategies. Moore's common sense appeal is one route. Others try to build complex epistemological theories. Science often takes a pragmatic path, focus on what works, what predicts, even without absolute certainty.
And the book ends with that anecdote. The Gen X character, hearing Socrates say the unexamined life is not worth living, and just replying,
Whatever.
yeah, whatever. What's the takeaway from that?
It just highlights that gap, doesn't it? Between these profound, potentially disturbing philosophical questions and just getting on with everyday life. The apathy, perhaps, that can arise when faced with seemingly unanswerable questions or deep uncertainty. It shows the ongoing challenge of connecting philosophy to lived experience.
So, wrapping up our deep dive on skeptical philosophy for everyone, it's really clear skepticism hasn't just been a side issue, it's been like a core engine driving philosophy forward, hasn't it?
Absolutely. From questioning our senses right up to the nature of meaning, ethics, politics, these doubts have forced thinkers to refine, defend, and develop an incredible diversity of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while maybe that extreme we know nothing view seems outlandish, the underlying questions about the limits of our knowledge, the foundations, they're serious and still shape how we think about, well, everything.
Totally agree. Hopefully, exploring this has given you, our listener, a clearer map for navigating these big, ongoing debates about what we know and how we know it.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Given how persistent these skeptical challenges are, how should we balance that natural human craving for certainty with the fact that uncertainty seems, well, unavoidable in so much of life and decision-making?
Or maybe think about this. In today's world, with just the fire hose of information and misinformation, how can the lessons from philosophy's long dance with skepticism help us all be a bit more critical, maybe more discerning about the knowledge we consume?